So after countless delays, Wonder Woman 1984 has finally been released in theaters. Well, HBO Max and select theaters, if theaters are still a thing where you live. Let's talk about this movie. Hey everyone, Mr. DVB here, and in today's video I'm going to be reviewing Wonder Woman 1984. This is the first film I reviewed in this channel since Tenet, all the way back in late August, so I apologize if I'm a bit rusty here. But let's talk about Wonder Woman. Taking place in 1984, the film follows Diana Prince as she continues to protect people as the heroine Wonder Woman. Once a strange rock appears, granting users incredible powers, she must take on a corrupt businessman known as Maxwell Lord, played by Pedro Pascal, with the help of the late Steve Trevor. Cheetah is also kind of in the film. So coming out of Wonder Woman 1984, I enjoyed the film. There's definitely a lot of mixed things about this movie going online right now. Originally, the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes was at an 89, and I think it's at like a 68. So it's dropped quite significantly since the original first wave of reviews came out. And the general consensus from fans and whatnot seems to be kind of all over the place. It's a pretty mixed user score and whatnot. So this is definitely not a film that is going to be beloved by everybody. It's definitely not going to be as well received as the first movie was. But I had fun with this film. I think it was an enjoyable experience. It definitely has issues, but I had fun with this movie, and it was just nice to see a superhero movie after not really having any since like 2019. I mean, technically there was Birds of Prey earlier this year, but that's not really a superhero film. So it was nice to just see a big comic book movie. I unfortunately did not get to see this movie in theaters because theaters are currently closed where I live. And HBO Max doesn't exist in Canada, so I had to get this movie through alternative means. But I watched it nonetheless, and I had a fun time with the film. Starting off with the positive aspects first, I think Gal Gadot is great in this movie. I don't think she was that good in the previous DCU films. I went back and rewatched all of them before seeing this. In Batman vs. Superman, she's barely in the movie, but there's definitely some line delivery from her that's not that good. I think she's better in Wonder Woman, but she's still not great. There's some scenes where she's supposed to convey emotion, and it's not the best acting.
Diana, go where? Go where? Go. No, please, no. 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 No, 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 no.
Here, I think whenever she's conveying, sadness or emotions like that, she's really good in this. She actually does that kind of stuff a lot better here than she did in the previous Wonder Woman. And in general, I thought her performance here was actually pretty solid overall. Definitely better than it was in the previous movie. So she was really solid in this movie, in my opinion, and I liked her performance a lot. As far as the other actors and characters go, I think everybody does a really good job here. I was actually really surprised with Kristen Wiig. She was the one casting choice that going into this movie I was a little bit apprehensive with because I don't really know her from that much besides SNL and Ghostbusters, neither of which are things I'm a huge fan of, so, when she was cast as what I initially thought was going to be the main villain, I was a little bit against that, but she was actually pretty damn good in this movie. I actually liked the way they wrote her character as well. Barbara Mernersha, I think, is the name of the character, and yeah, I actually liked her here. She was written kind of cheesy. I mean, she's, like, walking around, she drops all of her papers and that kind of stuff, the briefcase breaks open. There's a lot of cheesy stuff like that in this movie, but it didn't bother me. I actually liked the tone of this film quite a bit. It doesn't entirely line up with the tone of the first movie, that's for sure, but I did like, the tone of this movie overall, and I thought that, Kristen Wiig was pretty good in it. I also really, really liked Pedro Pascal. He's very over the top in this movie, sometimes a little bit too over the top in my opinion, but I did like him overall. I thought he was a pretty solid villain and I enjoyed his performance. And Chris Pine as Steve Trevor is back. I won't spoil how or whatever, but I liked him in this movie. He wasn't in it as much as I would have thought, but I still liked his performance. I think, the chemistry between him and Wonder Woman's character in the first movie was definitely the highlight of that film, and so it's nice to have that kind of carry over here. And this time around, the Fish Out of Water story is kind of him living in the 80s. It wasn't focused on as much as it was in the original, though, because, yeah, I felt like his character was kind of sidelined in this movie. Not really sidelined, but he just wasn't focused on as much as I thought he would have been. I kind of thought he would be the big plot point, but he really wasn't. This movie focuses a lot on Maxwell Lord, the villain, who I liked, but I think that's kind of where the movie's problems come in, is with the story. I think the story of this movie is a bit of a mess. First of all, the movie's 2.5 hours long, which I'm fine with. I don't mind long movies like that. But the movie does take a while to get started. We don't really have an actual conflict and, you know, villain and that kind of stuff until I'd say at least an hour and 20 minutes into the movie. It takes a while to get started up. And that was kind of odd in my opinion. Also, I don't really think the villain was... I mean, I liked him, but I don't really think it was super well handled. The story was pretty messy in my opinion, especially the final act. Just all over the place. It's not, you know, an out-of-place third act like Wonder Woman's was, like the first movie. That film's third act just kind of went against what the previous two acts had set up, and it just felt like it came out of nowhere. This third act isn't like that. I just don't think it was a great third act, honestly. It was just overall kind of messy. But it didn't have that issue that the first one had, where the first film's final act was just out of nowhere and pretty bad in comparison. So yeah, the story here was not that good. It was definitely a weaker story than the first movie, and it was really, you know, jumbled and all over the place. But I still had fun with the film for the most part, and I actually enjoyed the first hour and a half the most, which is probably the part of the movie that people are going to be complaining about the most, because it's not really, there's not that much going on from a threat standpoint. It's mostly just Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor kind of walking around and stuff, having fun. You got some stuff with Kristen Wiig's character, and then Pedro Pascal's on the side kind of doing his thing. His plot is, coming to form or whatever. And I don't know, the first bit of this movie I actually liked quite a bit. I liked that stuff. My personal favorite DCU film is Shazam, which is a film that did not have very memorable action or anything like that. And Wonder Woman 1984, one thing that I have heard complaints about is the lack of action. There is not that many action sequences in this movie. There's probably about 4 or so overall, which is definitely a bit odd when it's a Wonder Woman movie. I mean, the first movie had a pretty solid amount of action sequences, and there wasn't that many here. I did like them in this movie, though. I think they're better than they were in the previous movie. None of them are as memorable as No Man's Land. I think No Man's Land in general as a scene was great, but the action here, I like the way it was done more. One of my biggest issues with the first movie was how often it overused slow motion during the action sequences. It seemed whenever Wonder Woman did something cool, they would have to slow it down, and it just got really repetitive and frustrating. Here, luckily, they strayed away from that. There's still some slow-mo, but it's barely, used like it was in the first movie. Wonder Woman as a character in this movie is also quite a bit different. I mean, her outfit is a lot more vibrant and nice-looking. And just from a character standpoint, when it comes to the action and stuff, she's a lot more defensive. She's using her lasso and stuff. She's not, she no longer has a sword or anything like that. So she's a different type of character, and I liked that about it. It was just a fun movie. I think the tone of it was pretty good overall. I liked the kind of more campy feel. It wasn't as campy as I was expecting it to be, because I've heard some complaints about it being super corny. I didn't really feel that way. There was definitely some moments in the first 20 minutes or so that I thought were pretty cheesy. One scene especially in this mall. There was definitely a moment that I was kind of worried about, but I don't know. The overall film, it didn't really feel like it affected it that much. The tone, I liked it here. The opening sequence, by the way, there was kind of a little bit of it shown online from Warner Bros. I loved it. I think the opening sequence here, it's like in the Amazons when she's a kid. I think it's great. It's a lot better than the opening scene in the first movie, in my opinion. And overall, yeah, I mean, I really liked the way that a lot of this movie was filmed. I thought that the action sequences, while there was a lack of them, they were pretty good for the most part, and I liked that stuff. Otherwise, I have a list of things I want to mention here on my phone. The score done by Hans Zimmer here is great. Hans Zimmer is one of my personal favorites, if not my favorite composers out there, and I think the score he does here is great. The Wonder Woman theme makes its way back in. The theme is very memorable in my opinion, and I like what they did with it here, because I don't think it fits super well in Wonder Woman, the 2017 one, because it's this very electric guitar heavy music, and it's in a World War I setting. Here, they did a very good job at kind of having the same sound, but just changing the instruments up and stuff so it didn't sound as out of place. Not that an electric guitar would be out of place for the 80s, but I do like what they did with the score here. It was very good. The villains' themes and whatnot were pretty memorable in my opinion, so the score, really well done. They also use a theme from Batman vs. Superman in this movie, which I thought was kind of cool. So yeah, all that stuff I thought was great. CGI-wise, I've heard some complaints online about the CGI in this movie. I actually thought it was pretty decent. It was not as noticeable as it was in the first movie. There's a lot of moments in that first film where, they're very clearly CGI characters, or just certain things look really off. Here, I thought the CGI was quite a bit better. There were still some moments that were bad looking, but wasn't as noticeable as it was in the first movie, in my opinion, so I thought that was improved. The visuals, just like the colors and stuff, just like the first movie, are very nice. When you see Themyscira, which is not in this movie that much at all, it's just in the opening sequence, it looks great, right? The colors, the green, it's so luscious, and it looks very beautiful, so all that stuff, really nice. It really stands out here. and I like the color grading. It's just, you look at the previous DC films from the beginning of this whole franchise, like Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, they were so dark and washed out looking, so it's nice when you have a big vibrant movie like this that really fits with the tone. And as far as cons go, yeah, the biggest issues with this movie, like I said, by far is the story. It just gets really messy towards the end, and that was my biggest problem with the film by far, was the tone. Or not the tone, sorry, but just like the story, the tone I liked. So yeah, really just the messiness of the story was the biggest issue. There was also some plot explanations that I thought were very brief and kind of cheesy. There was one scene where they kind of find out the origin of this rock, and the way it was written and the way they get to that scene I thought was really just cheap and kind of rushed. Yeah, those were my issues with the movie. Overall, I had fun with it. I mean, I didn't come out of this thinking it was like a masterpiece or anything, but I did have fun with it. I do gotta say, I honestly disagree with the majority of people on this. I actually think it was a fun film. I could definitely see where people are not gonna like this. It is definitely a mess, I will say that. But I still had fun. It was still an enjoyable movie overall, and that's really all I can ask for. So those are my thoughts on Wonder Woman 1984. If you guys have seen the movie, let me know what you thought of it down below. I'll be reviewing Soul probably tomorrow, honestly. I said I was going to review Soul and do my ranking for the DC films tonight, but I work at like 9 a.m. and it's currently 12:30, so I'd like to just get this video out and then get like a couple hours of sleep, so I will have my ranking up tomorrow. That's my top priority. But yeah, thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you all next time.